It really is a pleasure and an honor to be up here, first time ever in Mount Dora. The furthest I have ever been in this part of Central Florida was over in Apopka, and I will tell you that this is a beautiful venue, and I will look forward to bringing the family up here and spending some time. And can y'all please close some of those antique shops if I bring my wife? And I'll be done. Okay, she loves antiques. You know, one of the things that the commissioner read about was when I first retired down in South Florida, I taught high school down at Deerfield Beach. And some people would say, well, why would you volunteer to go back over and be a civilian advisor in Afghanistan? Well, I figured if I'm going to be in a combat zone, I might as well. It's a little tough teaching down there in South Florida. But it is really nice to be here today. And the theme that you have, Let Freedom Ring, I think is so important for us where we are in the United States of America, and especially for the children and the grandchildren that we have. Because what I am so concerned about is that we may end up being the first generation of Americans that leave less to our subsequent generations than what was left for each and every one of us. Right. And the thing that it just absolutely amazes me, here I was born in 1961 in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia. My father was born in 1920 in South Alabama. He got smart, jumped the Chattahoochee River, and grew up in South Georgia. My mother was born in 1931 down in Fort Valley, Georgia. She grew up down in South Georgia as well. And if you could understand what it was like to be a black person in South Georgia in the 20s and the 30s, think about the fact that their son is now standing here in this venue that was built in 1883. That is how we let freedom ring, by making sure that we pass freedom, we pass on liberty, we pass on opportunities to our subsequent generations. But when we stop talking about that, when we stop sharing all of the greatness of America, the exceptionalism of America, when we don't talk about our foundations, being at the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, then we have people that can come along with cold-tested, marketed messages, bumper sticker slogans, and they can trick an entire nation. You know, when you go back and you look at the Declaration of Independence, that's where freedom was established. Because Thomas Jefferson said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And we fought a civil war to make sure that we upheld that promise. That they are endowed with certain unalienable rights. Those unalienable rights do not come from man. And Jefferson was very specific in putting that in the Declaration because he was establishing something that was different. He was establishing a place where freedom, where liberty, truly did not come from man, because man can take it away as soon as he can give it to you. But he said it comes from your Creator. And of these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is a pursuit of happiness that allows us to have our freedom in the United States of America. It is not a guarantee of happiness. Because when you start talking about a guarantee of happiness, that is something that man can give and take away, not the pursuit. And one of the things that we must come to realize, that there is no freedom, there is no liberty in sitting back and living in Section 8 housing, waiting for the federal government to give you just a little pittance by which you can survive. See, that's a new form of enslavement. That's an economic enslavement. That's an enslavement that takes away that individual's will, takes away their drive, takes away their determination, and eventually it takes away their freedom. Because when I go back to the neighborhood that I was brought up in, where there was once upon a time mothers and fathers with their families and their children, where there were churches that were thriving. I remember Sunday morning, all of us would have to wake up, and after our little morning chores, we'd walk up Kennesaw Avenue, get out there on Boulevard, and we'd go down to our respective churches. Those churches are suffering now because we don't understand what freedom truly means. When people come and tell you that freedom means separation of church and state, and you accept that, that's because you don't understand where freedom comes from. Because Thomas Jefferson wrote in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Convention, the separation of church and state means we will not have an established religion in the United States of America. We will not have a head of state that is also the head of church. But when people can take that simple concept that Jefferson wrote about and all of a sudden make you believe the separation of church and state means separating this country from its Judeo-Christian faith heritage, then you're losing your freedom. And how is that reflected? Just look at the recent decision with the Hobby Lobby case, where all of a sudden a corporation, a business, a family-owned business had to go and defend and fight for their religious freedom. Why? Because a government that believes they're the guarantee of happiness tried to take away the rights that were enshrined in the Constitution based upon what Thomas Jefferson wrote. And in that First Amendment, it says the freedom of religion and the free exercise thereof, not the freedom from religion. So if we are to let freedom reign, we have to first and foremost understand what freedom is. You know, there was a great quote from Abraham Lincoln that he gave at a speech back in 1864. And it was his definition in getting people to understand what liberty truly means. And I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. But Lincoln said there is this one word called liberty, which many people use, but actually has two different meanings to two different types of people. For one people, liberty means the right and the freedom of an individual to work hard and to be able to live off the fruits of their labor. But to another group, the word liberty means the right that they have to come down and take away the fruits of one's labor for their own means. And Lincoln said, therein you have an incredible juxtaposition. In this one word that means two different things to two different groups of people. But what in truth, what it really comes down to is a difference between liberty and tyranny. If you don't understand your inalienable rights, you will never be able to have true freedom. And if you don't understand where those rights come from, you will not be able to pass that on to those subsequent generations. And see, this is why we have a foundation that is trying to do one simple mission: to have the conversation with all Americans, especially with Americans in minority communities, to really talk about what freedom is. Because if you're not careful, all of a sudden, everything gets turned upside down. I will tell you that the Black community was probably a more prosperous and better community before the Great Society programs of Lyndon Baines Johnson than it is today. When you go back and you read the writings of Booker T. Washington, the man that I call the first Black conservative, we're not here talking about party, folks. We're here talking about principles. That's the most important thing. And Booker T. Washington at the Southern Exposition, where he gave a speech in Atlanta, Georgia, talked about three fundamental principles that he wanted to see for the Negro: education, entrepreneurship, and self-reliance. Now, if you're not going to tell me that those are conservative principles and values, those are the things that made Booker T. Washington and his message the establishment of Tuskegee Institute and the success of the Black community. But you look at the Black community today, do you see the education? Do you see the entrepreneurship? Do you see the self-reliance? No, you don't. You see failing schools. And you see a group of people that don't want to have school choice or charter schools in those communities. You don't see the small business development and growth that I saw when I went walking down the street from Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic School past Ebenezer Baptist Church down Auburn Avenue. Auburn Avenue, where I saw doctors' offices and lawyers' offices and small businesses. When I went back to Atlanta in October of last year and I went down Auburn Avenue, I only saw one thing that was open. That was a liquor store. Since the Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson, the Black community now has 72% out of wedlock births. That was not the community that I grew up in. And that's what we need to have the conversation about. And the same with the Hispanic community that believes in self-reliance, believes in entrepreneurship, small business growth, faith, and family. We need to have those conversations. Because those conversations, as the commissioner said in the book that I wrote, faith, family, freedom. They're all interconnected, and they're all so important. So the challenge we have here today, as we sit here in Mount Dora, is will we step up and understand and talk about what freedom truly means? Freedom does not mean that you sit back and you wait for the government's subsistence. Freedom means that you have an equality of opportunity, which is tied to the pursuit of happiness, as opposed to an equality of outcomes that's tied to a guarantee of happiness. Because when someone is telling you how far that you can go, when someone is telling you what you can truly achieve in life, that's not freedom. That's servitude. That's subservience. And that's not what Thomas Jefferson established this nation to be. That's not what James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton wrote a constitution enshrining our rule of law for us to be. You know, I can stand here and give you a nice, pretty, feel-good speech, but I can't do that. It's just the same as when I was a battalion commander in Iraq and I stood before 700 troops 2 days before we crossed the border and we went north into Iraq. There were only 2 people in that battalion who had ever served in combat. It was myself and the sergeant major. We had to tell them the truth about what they were going into. And because of that, we didn't lose one soldier in any combat engagement during the time period when I was a commander. We trained them hard, we told them the truth. And so I'm telling you the truth right now. That which is the American dream, the individual sovereignty, our freedom, our liberties, is in danger of being lost.
Right.
And if we are not willing to make the stand and make the fight, the other side is willing to make that fight. But if you're not willing to make that stand and make the fight, you're going to have to look at your children and grandchildren. And you're going to have to explain to them why. That which you were able to have, that which you were given, that birthright that you have as an American citizen, you did not feel it was worth your sacrifice to pass it on to them. That's what this comes down to. See, I stand here today because of all the trials, the tribulations, and the sacrifices that my parents and grandparents went through to get me to where I am today. When I look at my 2 daughters, 21 and 17, there is no way that I will not allow them to have the same liberties and freedoms that I've enjoyed, the same opportunities for success that I have had. That's the challenge for me. It's a beautiful day. This is a beautiful venue. But don't you want to make sure that your children and grandchildren can come back here 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, and maybe one of them can stand here at this podium and talk about how my father, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather sacrificed to make sure that I had all the great freedoms and liberties that this nation can afford. That there was not a sunset on these great United States of America. That the longest running constitutional republic that the world has ever known can continue to be sustained. And they passed on that incredible legacy to me in this day. That's our challenge. And when you think about it, it's a challenge that was laid down, and I shared this earlier. It was a challenge that was laid down about 217 years ago. Because in September of 1787, after the deliberations for the United States Constitution were over, Benjamin Franklin walked out of Independence Hall, and a Philadelphia socialite by the name of Mrs. Powell came up to him. And she said, "Well, doctor, what is it that we have? A republic or a monarchy?" Franklin replied, "You have a republic if you can keep it." The challenge to you today, if you want to let freedom reign, you have a republic, but are you willing to keep that republic where the individual, your freedoms and your liberties reign preeminent? These are indeed the times which will try men's souls, when the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink from their duties. But to those, to the man, to those who will stand, they will deserve the love and admiration of all mankind. Ladies and gentlemen, this country is hurting. This country is looking for principled men and women that will stand and tell them the truth, that will stand and tell them the right solutions to the issues and the problems that they're facing. Being that they can't afford to go to the grocery store and buy the meat, the eggs, and the milk. It's hard to fill up your gasoline tank. People who used to be on full-time equivalent employment are now on part-time. College students that are graduating with immense amount of college debt cannot find a job. They're looking for people that talk about what freedom really is. The challenge is, will we be the ones that tell them that? And I can tell you that no one needs it more than in the minority communities where our inner cities are failing, faltering, and crumbling. We owe it to those who are the least amongst us to make sure that they can be with us and be just as great and exceptional as this country demands. The other thing that I want to close on is we must raise the next generation of American leadership. And when that young man was here in the high school junior ROTC program, I started in 1976 at Grady High School in a junior ROTC program. But when you have people such as a city commissioner up in Brooklyn, New York, or Queens, New York, that wants to destroy and get rid of those high school ROTC programs, that's affecting the next generation of American leaders that will stand patriotic, that will stand understanding our principles, that will stand understanding what it means to be an American leader. Lieutenant Colonel Pagonis, Major Heredia, Master Sergeant Buchanan, Sergeant First Class McMichael were my ROTC instructors from 1976 to 1979 at Henry Grady High School in Atlanta, Georgia. They're the reason why I went on to the University of Tennessee in college ROTC. They're the reason why I graduated from the University of Tennessee with a commission in the United States Army in the Field Artillery, and I served 22 years. They're the people that put me on the path to be an American statesman and leader. We have a great program that our young men and women, especially in our inner city communities, need to see positive role models, not negative role models. So let's join in in making sure that we teach them the right lessons of leadership so they don't gravitate to the negative lessons that you see, which resulted in Chicago over Independence Day weekend, with 16 being killed, almost 60 being wounded in gun shootings, or Detroit, or Los Angeles, or Washington, D.C., or Philadelphia, or Atlanta, or even here in Jacksonville, Florida. Our inner cities are crumbling. They're forgetting what freedom means because we're not talking to them about it. Giving you a challenge, and I think you'll step up to the plate. Because you know why? Americans have always stepped up to the plate in times of trouble. And these are indeed perilous times. So God bless you all. God bless these great United States